Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Outdoor Adventure Series podcast, where we celebrate individuals and families, businesses, and organizations that seek out and promote the exploration, stewardship, conservation, access, and enjoyment of the outdoors. I'm Howard Fox, your host, and I have the pleasure today to introduce you to Glen Van Peski. Glen is an accomplished dare I say, maybe retired civil engineer and land surveyor, but he is known most for founding Gossamer Gear and being a proponent of ultralight backpacking. He is also the author of the newly released book, Take Less, Do More, Surprising Life Lessons in Generosity, Gratitude, and Curiosity from an Ultralight Backpacker. Glen, it's a pleasure to kick you off as my first official podcast in the new year. Welcome. How are you doing?
Thanks, Howard. Doing great. Thanks for having me on your show.
Fantastic. Now, I was fortunate to meet you actually through a great site that we're both members of, Podmatch, and I get some great guests. And I was really excited when I was finding there's a lot of outdoor enthusiasts out there. And then when you showed up with your reach out, and I saw that what you do in the book, I'm thinking this is great because I would love to hike. My biggest worry is I haven't brought everything that I needed, okay, when I hike. And so I'm sure you've heard that before, but I would love, first off, where are you located?
We currently live in Bend, Oregon.
Okay.
We
I've
we
heard,
lived many years in San Diego area, and then when I retired about 7 years ago, we moved up to Bend. Which, if you
okay.
like the outdoors, in my opinion, is pretty much heaven on earth. I mean, it's just amazing.
I have heard that about Bend. I have some friends that live up there, and one, Emmanuel Rose, who also is a podcaster. And he just, I mean, always talks about going fishing. What's the river that goes through
The
Bend?
the Deschutes,
The Deschutes, yes.
yeah.
Oh, it's like, and it sounds beautiful. So I know I have to get up to Bend and pay a visit, and for another reason too, and it has to do with drinking a particular beverage, but we will get to that. So first off, if you could share a little bit about yourself and your background, and before we kinda get more into the book, Take Less, Do More. So what's a high level story you would like to share?
Yeah, the 30,000-foot story is, born in Southern California. Dad's an engineer. My mom, was a she was a stay-at-home mom, for most of her life. Um, and lived in Southern California until my parents divorced, and then we moved back to Massachusetts. So kind of from one end of the coast to the other,
Oh, yeah.
or one end of the country to the other. And then in 1976, I graduated high school and thought it would be a good idea to ride my bicycle back across the country to the West Coast. So rode
Literally ride your bike?
4,200 miles that summer across the country. That was to date still my biggest, longest adventure.
Okay.
And then, once I got out here, started working, went to college, got an engineering degree, got an MBA, got married, had some kids, accidentally started a backpacking company, was almost killed in a plane crash, and ended up having a very long career as a civil engineer in land development,
Okay.
and recently retired and moved to Bend.
Excellent. Now I do have to circle back a little bit and, uh, wanting to ride your bike across the country, what prompted you to wanna do that?
I should dig back through my journals and see if I captured any of the thought process, because I was thinking about this the other day and I was like, I don't know why I thought this was a good idea. I wasn't particularly adventurous. I'm an engineer. I'm like a books guy. I mean, I did play lacrosse in high school, but um, didn't do a lot of adventure. I was in Boy Scouts, but we didn't have a particularly adventurous troop. So I have no idea how I suddenly got the idea, hey, it'd be great to hop on my bike and ride 4,200 miles across the country. And originally, I was gonna do it by myself, and then I started kinda talking it up, and 3 buddies wanted to go, so there ended up being 4 of us doing the trip. And this is you couldn't research anything on the internet, or I mean, there was our planning consisted of getting a map of the entire country and taking a blue highlighter and drawing a line across it. And we started pedaling. That was it.
Okay. You know, I think I had shared sometimes we don't know where the conversation is going. I have to share this and for our listeners. I had what I call a discovery call with a potential guest on today. And he said, I like the idea. I don't know if I have 30 minutes to talk to chat with you about. And I was actually thinking to myself, oh, my friend, you have no idea because you never know where the conversations are going to go. One more question again, as we talk about this trip with on the bike with four friends, and it brought me back to the tagline of your book from Take Less, Do More, Surprising Life Lessons in Generosity, Gratitude, and Curiosity. There must have been a lot of instances of lessons learned, like, I can't believe I just did that, or we'll do that again. Generosity from people you met along the way, and just gratitude to them for, giving you a barn to sleep in or a hot meal or a fresh or a nice shower. So I'm curious if you I mean, it's been a while, but, I mean, what was that like, just kinda meeting classic America as a youth, going across country like that?
It was great when you see the country. I mean, we love road trips today, and that's one thing. That's you see more of the country than flying across it for sure.
Mhm.
But there's something about pedaling over every foot of it. You just see it at a different level and a different pace than is generally possible today. People would be in a store buying lunch. Our typical thing was we'd go into a store, buy a loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter, and a jar of jelly, and then we'd sit in a circle and then pass it around until everything was gone because we don't want to carry the heavy jars, and so it's just that's the way we that's the way we had lunch. And often we'd be in a store and people would ask us like, "Hey, where are you guys from? And what are you doing?" And um, when we told them, sometimes they'd, "Well, here, buy some chips on here's some chips," or "I'm paying for your lunch," or something like that. The one generosity kind of above all it sticks in my mind is um, we would stay a lot at kind of rest stops that weren't in heavy use because they'd been bypassed by the interstate on the old state highways. So we just camp out, stay at a rest stop. But if we were in a town, kind of in rural middle America, and it was towards the end of the day, we'd often just pick a house at random, go up and knock on the door and ask if we could sleep on their front lawn. Um, and so we were doing that one day, one evening, and knocked on the door, and an old guy answered the door. And I'm 17, so I don't know how old he was, but I'm guessing I had to be 70s. Um,
Near our age, by the way, but,
yeah, yeah, exactly. I know, I always kinda have to do the math, but, and, he said, "Oh, yeah, sure, but, come around the side because 'cause it'll be more protected from the wind," and so, great. So the 4 of us are setting up our shelters, and he comes out to chat with us and find out about our adventure, and he asked, "Well, what time do you guys get going in the morning?" And we said, "Well, usually pretty early. It's a long way across the country, and we need to get our miles in." And he looked disappointed, and I asked, "Well, how come?" And he says, "Well, my wife and I would really like to make you a proper breakfast and send you off, but she's got really bad arthritis, and it's particularly bad in the morning, so we just couldn't do that." And so I said, "Well, thanks. We're grateful just to have a place to stay off the road. We don't need any food." And he came out later and brought us like a thing of little Hostess donuts, so we'd have at least something. So the next morning, we're kind of packing up our bikes. It's probably 7 o'clock ish, and the door to their house opens, and the guy beckons us over. So we walk across the dewy grass, and he invites us in. His wife had gotten up in spite of the arthritis pain
oh, wow.
and put together a breakfast that was enormous. I mean, they had eggs and bacon and sausage and biscuits and pancakes. And I mean, there was so much food. I can't even imagine. I mean, I'm sure we ate their week's worth of groceries in one sitting.
Oh, wow.
And it just impressed me so much that they These are 4 random smelly strangers that showed up at their door, but they wanted to make a difference that day, and, I've been telling the story for almost 50 years, and I like to think as long as they lived, they told that story too. I remember that summer of '76 when those 4 hungry kids showed up, and man, could they eat.
I love it. I love it. And then now that has me thinking that this is part of that initial spark, that idea that just entered into your consciousness and now is a part it's a story you're telling, but is also part of the foundation of this book. And so I just it that piece is not lost, I think, on me, and perhaps that is part of the reason you're writing this book and talking about generosity and gratitude and curiosity, because there's all of that was there in that moment.
Yeah. No, and it's you see sometimes the trail as it is or it's kind of a microcosm or a crucible. It kind of refines things and, accentuates them. I mean, my mom always brought us up, that if you have, it comes with an obligation to be generous with what you have.
Okay.
Noblesse oblige was her saying. If you've been blessed, then that comes with an obligation to bless others. Um, so kind of came from an early age, but definitely at that uh, town in Illinois was a big reminder of that.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I do appreciate Illinois, having lived half my life there as well, so that's the thumbs up there. As you then transition in a career in engineering and land surveying, how did the backpack and the topic of ultralight or the subject of ultralight, how did that come about? What's that storyline?
Well, there's a number of threads to that. I mean, it started. My mom thought that every kid should leave home knowing 3 basic skills: how to cook, how to bake, and how to sew. She just considered those basic life skills that
Mhm.
everyone should know. And so I actually sewed some gear, for that bicycle trip in 1976. I sewed myself a tarp and, some netting to go over the hammock that I had and some other minor stuff. And I had sewed sleeping bag kits and, down jackets and things like that. Um, so and actually the ultralights started on that trip too, because when you're gonna be bicycling 4,200 miles, even though you've got wheels, it's like every ounce counts. And so I
Sure.
weighed everything, chopped my toothbrush in half, mailed some gear back that I didn't need partway along the way. Um, but it was really, when our oldest son, Brian, joined Boy Scouts that it kinda kicked up a notch. Um, we joined a very active troop, had a number of trips, and, kind of the capstone of the backpacking program for the year was a week in the High Sierra. Pretty serious trip.
Sure.
And around this time, the scoutmaster, who was also a friend of mine, Reed Miller, read Ray Jardine's book, the PCT Hiker's Handbook,
Mhm.
which he talked about going ultralight on his through hike of the PCT. And so Reed decides that he's going to section hike the PCT. And we started thinking hard about how to lighten backpacking gear. And one of the heaviest things on my gear list was the 7.5 pound backpack that I'd bought at REI the previous year to go to the Sierras. So I thought, well, that's probably a good place to start. So I sewed a backpack and kept sewing.
Okay. Very nice. As you were embarking now on this entrepreneurial path, how did this begin to transition into I need to write a book. There's a book in me, or I have a story or stories I want to tell. Because writing a book is, I mean, you've raised kids, your wife has birthed kids. So, and I always equate to writing a book like birthing a baby, because that's about as painful as I can imagine it is. So how did you begin to contemplate, hey, I want to write a book, and this is what I would like to be about. This is what I want to share with the folks that I hope are going to pick this book up.
Well, it was kind of like kicking and screaming, I guess. I never wanted to write a book because I suspected what I now know is that it's a lot of work and it doesn't stop when the book comes out. If you want it to be successful, well, then you need to promote it. You need to be on podcasts and write newsletters and update a website and things like that that take you away from trips. Um, but along the way in the gear company, I became friends with and business partners with John Mackey, the co-founder of Whole Foods Market.
Okay.
And John does a number of hikes. He's a huge hiker, does a number of trips, and he likes to spend time with people that he enjoys. And so he invites them on these trips. And so I end up doing a fair amount of walking with John on a typical year.
Mhm.
Um, and on the trips, probably about 10 years ago, he starts saying he's a big gear guy and a very lightweight backpacker, too, very strong hiker. And he would, about 10 years ago, we'd be walking along and he'd say, Glenn, we'd be talking about gear as usual. And he'd say, Glenn, you need to write a book. You need to get some of these ideas down.
Ah,
And I always said, well, I think there's already great books on ultralight backpacking. I'm not sure the world needs my additional 2 cents on the subject. And every year he'd say, hey, you really need to write that. How that book's coming? He says, you write a book, I'll write the forward. And
that's generous.
years would go, but yeah, generous. Years would go by, and soon he gets his friends, his friends. He said, yeah, Glenn's going to be writing a book. So I'll be walking along one of his friends and I go, hey, John tells me you're writing books. Like, oh my gosh, no, I'm not writing a book. And finally I decided there were a couple of things that kind of gave me an idea I could do it a little differently. And I finally I thought about his offer to write the forward, and I thought, there's probably not too many people that have that offer, and I probably ought to take advantage of it. And so I finally wrote a book.
Okay. So, what is the high level message of the book? And for our listeners again, take less, do more, surprising life lessons in generosity, gratitude, and curiosity from an ultralight backpacker. Now, we should probably talk about ultralight backpacking in a minute, but yeah, this is not your typical how-to book of here's how you go on a 10-week traverse of the Pacific Crest Trail or the John Muir Trail. This is not that kind of book. So, how would you describe this book to our audience?
Well, there is one chapter that kind of catalogs my thinking on ultralight backpacking.
Okay.
So there is that for the hikers in the group. But what occurred to me as I've spent roughly the last 50 years reducing my pack weight, to the point where when I'm going out now, my base pack weight is typically under 5 pounds. So it's all my extra clothing, my backpack, sleeping pad, sleeping bag, first aid, cooking gear, everything except food and water. Is typically under 5 pounds. It occurred to me that the lessons I learned over the years had application to the rest of life also. And so this book captures those kind of the parallels as things you learn in the wilderness that you can apply to the rest of your life. And let's be honest, there's nothing revolutionary in this book. I haven't discovered some massive hack that's going to fill your life with more meaning, purpose, and joy. But by the same token, coming at it from a slightly different perspective and realizing that I don't know if you're the only one, if I'm the only one that you read a book that you read 5 years ago, and all of a sudden you see something you didn't see before because now you're ready for it. So my hope is that, and experience seems to be bearing this out, that the words I've chosen, the stories I've told in this book, kind of the new way will coincide with the proper timing in some people's lives, and they'll get something valuable out of the book.
Okay. I one of the points that I'm taking away from as I'm learning more about you through your website, through all we have to do is do a Google search of Glen Van Peski and thank God for AI and what it does for us. And I get a nice picture of who you are and what you're doing, what you have done. And a couple of the points from the book that I think are very timely, are always timely. And what the first is the idea of generosity and gratitude is how has a point like this help you in your, I don't know what you want to call it, whether you call it a moral compass, a values compass, but how has generosity and gratitude kind of informed where your compass is pointing?
Well, as I as I think I mentioned, I mean, from an early age, my mom always stressed the importance of being generous. And so we've always been generous. And actually it's interesting. That's one of the things that keeps coming up in people comments I get from people, what they took from the book. And that is a more intentional approach to generosity. So a long time ago, we started opened up a separate checking account and took a set percentage of our income and put it in that account so that we were giving how much we intention to give. We just didn't know where it was going yet. And
Right.
then as needs came up, uh, we could address those needs just whether or not we just need to determine if it had our name on it. We didn't need to, oh, we'd like to help, but we're a little tight this month, or the kid needs braces, or the car needs a transmission. We know we're not in a position to help. We were in a position to help because we had determined ahead of time to be in that position to help. And we started small, like at 5% of our after tax income. And now we're giving a very large portion of our before tax income. Um, but that's grown over the years. And that seems to be resonating with people that I think people want to be generous, but they don't have like a good system for
Mhm.
doing that. And so, I mean, that could be the number one thing that people are getting out of the book is like, this is great. I'm starting with a couple percent of whatever and putting it in a separate account so that I can be generous when needs arise.
Okay. Another point, and this is actually, you have been weaving this throughout our conversation so far, is this idea of simplicity and minimalism. And I, when I have to, this is in the spirit of full disclosure. When I moved from Chicago to Las Vegas, I lived. A friend of mine had an apartment. He wasn't living in it. He goes, Howard, why don't you just live here? And I paid him. I paid the rent. Fortunately or unfortunately, I live right above an REI. REI folks, I love you guys, but it's dangerous to live above an REI. And I found myself trying to prepare to go car camping, to sleep and see the stars in the desert. That's really what I wanted to do. And also learn how to do dark sky photography. And I realized, and I still have the remnants, is I bought a lot of stuff I didn't need. And I've come to believe that we buy stuff, we have stuff, accumulate stuff. And how have you been living your life? And what are the messages in this book that promote this idea of really having the things that matter most? I mean, we want our good health, we want a healthy family, and our kids to be successful and safe, and grandkids, et cetera, et cetera. But how has this idea of simplicity and minimalism helped you in your journey, especially now as you're retired and I have written this book? What are some of those lessons learned along that front?
Well, we've got another hour, right? Because
Yeah, we got an
that's a
hour. We
lot.
got
That's a lot to unpack there.
that's a
Uh,
lot.
well, and in your
They have to read the book. We got to send them to the book.
in since you said in terms of full disclosure, I will say if you meet me on the trail, I've got minimalism down. I mean, I got my 5 pound base back weight. I am carrying only what I need, probably nothing that I don't. In the rest of my life, I model that less successfully.
Okay.
Um, and and actually trying for the lightest weight means sometimes works against me. Now I have a lot of gear. And Michael Easter makes the point, the author, and I think it's in Comfort Crisis or in his 2%. um, website, blog community, he makes the distinction between stuff and gear. So he
Mhm.
says, if you have something that you use to do something, then that's gear. That's not stuff. It's a different thing. I have a lot of gear. Now, some of it is because I loan out a lot of gear. People want to try some Gossamer product and they don't, it's not easy. They don't want to order it to try it and then return it. So I have a lot of loaners. I also, since I'm always trying to reduce the weight, if I know it's going to be 30 degrees at night, well, I don't want to take my 20-degree bag that's a couple ounces heavier. So I have a 30-degree bag. And same with, I have a wide variety of clothing so that pretty much for any condition, I can have the lightest solution to that
Okay.
anticipated condition. Um, so I have more gear than probably I need, I'm sure.
Okay.
Um,
Has that gear, ver I was it's funny, I'm listening and I was taking a note. The difference between what is gear and what is the
stuff.
stuff. How has that served you in business and just in living life in general, besides over and above just Gossamer and writing this book? I mean, how has that served you, and how has that helped you influence others?
Well, try not to waste money on stuff that you don't need. I mean, what's going to be the optimal solution? What's the gear that you need to get there? And then get that gear. Now, I will admit, um, I think it's on the shelf behind me. There's some crossover. I mean, I have a alcohol stove that was made for me by a make your own gear guy like 12 years ago, 15 years ago in Japan.
Mhm.
And I've never used it because it's so beautiful. It's like it would get you to the moon. I mean, it's just a work of art. And so I enjoy that just to look at it. And I know the care and the craftsmanship that went into it. And so I keep that and it's just stuff. It's just something on my shelf, but it makes me smile every time I see it. So I think there's room for some of those things.
I and I agree with that because there's I rent in a house. A lot of my stuff is still in storage, over the 4 years I've been in Las Vegas is a reminder of how much do I really need. And so I love, but it is important to have things that remind you of good times, good experiences, and so I do appreciate the sentiment you just shared. I would imagine just being out on the trail, you have met a lot of interesting people whose stories have it either you've been influenced by or that you've influenced them. Any thoughts on how that has been woven into the book?
Well, sometimes people will meet me and they'll say, "Oh, Glenn, you have such an interesting life." And my response is, "Boy, I think everyone has an interesting life. It's just we don't usually have the time to talk to them long enough and get to know them well enough to find out." And that's one of the great things about walking. I'm often on some of the John Mackey trips. Maybe you're hiking between huts or something, but you're walking all day. And his friends are interesting people, or they wouldn't be invited on the trip. And so you can start to tell a story, and someone will go, "Ah, it's a long story." And it's like, okay, well, we've got all day.
We
We're
got
doing
time.
nothing but walking. There's no time limit. And so
Yeah.
you really get to know people and hear their stories. But that's something you just don't experience. Everyone's busy, working a couple jobs. And maybe if you say, "Oh, let's go get coffee," and it's like, okay, you've got an hour. And then you're both rushing off to the next thing. It's not like you're walking all day to just talk about whatever and hear some of those stories.
Okay. By the way, you just said the magic word for me, coffee. For our listeners, I was reading some of the blog postings on Glenn's website, and I discovered that he is a coffee roaster. So, I mean, you and I could be talking about spending a whole day talking about simplicity and minimalism. We could talk a whole day about just coffee roasting. Um, when you're out on on the trail, are you drinking coffee? I mean, how are you making this elixir of the gods on the trail? Or do
Well,
you have to wait to you or maybe it's something you can't bring?
I mean, it's something I could bring, and my stove setup would be pretty minimal. I mean, I've got that anyway for hot food. It would be easy to make coffee. But when I'm out in the wilderness, I prefer to be walking. I don't generally sit well
Okay.
um, outdoors. Probably something I should work on. And so I would, if there's light enough to see the trail, I'm generally, my feet are moving.
Okay.
And so my hack is um, 7 or 8 dark chocolate covered espresso beans,
Uh-huh.
because you can't drink coffee while you're walking. It's pretty hard,
Right.
but you can eat chocolate covered espresso beans while you're walking.
Okay. Alright. I interviewed a gentleman, Victor, a couple of months ago. He lives in Bulgaria, and I actually met him via a Facebook page. He essentially takes his coffee brewing gear out in these beautiful vistas, and that's all he does is just grind his coffee bean in his Timu grinder or Commandante grinder. He's got his portable V60 or his AeroPress. I love my AeroPress just for going out. And I just thought coffee is just a wonderful way to embrace the morning. But I imagine you're up pretty early to get a good start. You're walking, you're enjoying the coffee beans. How do you celebrate at the end of the day, even though at some point you have to stop? The light is diminished enough that it's no longer safe to be on the trail, perhaps. But how do you then enjoy the day and then share each other's experiences, uh, however long the journey is gonna be?
Well, now actually, I'm not gonna look up Victor, because for some reason I already get in my feed some Japanese guy that does something similar. I mean, he's got these elaborate setups
Yeah,
in nature. I call it coffee porn.
I've
Uh,
seen that.
it's like, oh my gosh, it's amazing. And when Francine and I like to travel a lot in our Sprinter van,
Mhm.
Wally we call him, and so if we're there, I've got beans that I roasted at home before we left. I've got my grinder, and I've got my mocha pot. And so I will make some nice coffee for that. There's
Okay,
no weight. I don't have to carry the extra weight. And usually I get up before Francie also, so there's no time penalty. It's like freebie.
okay,
Um, but we did a couple years back, a buddy of mine in the alley here, Mike, we're talking over the fence one afternoon. He says, "Yeah, Glenn." He knew I'd ridden my bicycle cross country in 1976, and he's way bigger into cycling than I am, and skiing and a lot of things. Um, and he said, "Glenn, I feel like I want to do like a big adventure, like a big adventure." And I said, "Well, you're telling the wrong guy, because we can make this happen." And so we ended up. I broke my shoulder the next year, but the year after, we did 1,000 miles bike packing on the Great Divide,
oh, wow,
mountain bike route.
yeah,
Uh, and one of the routines we developed was having a coffee at the end of the day. That was like
okay,
when dinner was done. We're usually typically in campground, so we had a picnic table to sit at, and we sit there, and I'd kind of update the notes from the day, what the mileage was, and kind of interesting people we met or towns we passed by, any scenic things. And after dinner, he'd fire up. He had a jet boil, so it was easy to fire it up and make another thing of hot water. And I had a bunch of Starbucks Vias, and
okay,
we would each have a cup of coffee, which I would never do at home. Like last thing before going to bed, have a cup of coffee. But when you're riding a bike for 16 hours a day, doesn't much matter.
no,
We slept
I
just
love
fine.
that. I love that, I love that. Where are your adventures taking you and your wife today? I mean, how do you well, before you answer that question, I have this feeling, and you can dispel it for me or agree that when you give somebody this taste of adventure to get out there and just keep moving and exploring, it's kind of hard to tell somebody to slow down. So I have the sense that you like to continually be out there having this new experience. Is that a true statement?
That's fair. It's complicated. So I'm not married to a hiker. Francie, she can do it because nobody can tell her what she can't do. But doesn't bring her joy the same way it brings me joy. And
Okay.
definitely she's not a fan of sleeping on the ground and going days without a shower.
Hence
Um,
the sprinter van. Okay.
Hence the sprinter van. Exactly. We're out boondocking, so I can have a campfire and sit around in nature. But she gets to wash her hair and we sleep in a bed at night. So
Okay.
it's a happy compromise.
Okay.
Um, and I probably don't get out as much as most people assume I do. Now, we were away from home 126 days out of last year. So we are gone a fair amount between road trips, um, being invited on other people's trips by other people. Last year, we were on a bike barge trip with a bunch of Australian friends that was organized by someone else. We just had to sign up and pay and join them for that. And then John Mackey trips, that's organized. If you get invited, you just show up and do those hikes. And then I have some hikes that I do that I'll get extra permits. I keep a list of people who are they meet three criteria. They're good company in the backcountry. They have their kit generally squared away, and they've got some level of fitness. And so I'll send out. I think that list probably has about 80 people on it now. I'll get extra permits and send out a invite to the list, and whoever can make it can make it. And so that's I have the permits. I can answer questions. I'm not a guide, but it allows people an opportunity to like, oh yeah, this looks like a fun bucket list trip. Let's do that.
Okay. Well, I have to say, I unfortunately, Glenn, I don't think I meet your criteria. I need to be out. I sit a lot between coaching and podcasting. I did get out to the desert for a nice light hike. However, should you ever boondock your way down to Las Vegas, I would love to have coffee with you. So I'm just going to put that out there and we'll let the universe take care of itself.
We were in Las Vegas. One of our trips this year, we actually stopped by to see Michael Easter, who lives outside of Vegas. So we were boondocking. Oh, I won't remember the spot. It was beautiful. Um, Kind of on the west end. There's some little canyon up there.
Oh, Red Rock Conservation Area. No?
Could have been.
Okay.
It was some kind of conservation area.
Okay. Very good. Well,
Yeah.
if you ever get back, please, I will bring the coffee. I will bring the coffee. I will supply
Okay.
the freshly roasted coffee. I promise that. What are you gonna do? What's your steps now as we for the book? I mean, it's been released. Obviously, you're doing these podcasts. This is a part of the marketing effort, the things you have to do. You've got a wonderful blog. I love the fact that they're short. In a couple minutes, I can read a nice story, which is how I found out about the coffee. But what more are you going to be doing, to get word out about this book? And what's going to be your takeaway to the readers when they learn about Take Less, Do More?
Well, I'm donating all the profits from the book to the Pacific Crest Trail Association. So this isn't an exercise in generating income. It's just taking time at this point. Um,
Okay.
um, and so we are talking. I think we've got some plans to come up with some study guides. One that book like a book club could use because a number of book clubs are using the book.
Mhm.
And sometimes I show up via Zoom to their meeting or this next weekend in person. And then perhaps one that's leadership based and maybe a study guide that's faith based. So the different groups could have an opportunity to have some kind of structured reading of the book in a group. Um, Also looking at some speaking engagements. I enjoy speaking to different groups, so we'll be probably traveling down to Southern California this spring to give a talk at my old alma mater,
Okay.
Cal State Northridge. Um, talking about going out to Georgia and speaking to the Air Force out there. So um, just right now, I'm just seeing what doors open basically. And I've kind of in my mind figured I'd give it a year, which would be April of this year, and then reassess how much time is this taking relative to time I want for other stuff, adventures and things like that.
Sure, sure. Well, I certainly appreciate you taking the time to be on our podcast. It means a lot and a great story. And again, between the subject matter and coffee, can't go wrong. Before we head out, as you kind of look back on your journey, Glenn, what has been your aha moment? Whether it was, I mean, the biking across country with your friends, we didn't even talk about your career. Now the Gossamer gear, now the book. What when did you look issue? What was the kind of this aha moment when you look back, you say, wow, this has made a difference in someone's life, or and this is why I do what I do.
There have been, I guess, there have been lots of those, and one, I guess, would be. Well, we probably don't have time for that story.
See, we're gonna need a couple hours, you
Yeah.
know, bet between minimalism, coffee, and now this, it's okay.
Yeah. To me, one of my favorite things is designing and sewing a new piece of gear for something that I need. And, getting someone to think differently about their gear. I was attending giving a little seminar for the local group of women who explore recently. And most of them had blow up air mattresses, which I don't carry. And I was explaining to them that if you can contour the ground to match your back, you don't really need an air mattress. And they were pretty skeptical. And so, I just got down on the dirt and uh, contoured out a little thing. And just the look on their eyes as they lay down and go, oh my gosh, he's right. It's like, it's super comfortable on a quarter-inch foam pad. I don't need that 1 pound air mattress. So just the ability to get people to try something different
Mhm.
and realize like, oh, the way I was thinking about this is not the only way you can think about it.
I love that story and that insight, uh, aha moment, because that's a coaching moment, because so many times our clients, they see the tree right in front of them, and if only they'd step back and perhaps reframe how they're looking at the issue that they're facing, or how they're perceiving what it's gonna be like, all that change that perspective makes all the difference in the world. So that's very it's very coaching-esque to me. So as a coach, I appreciate that. Any final insight for our listeners? Could be a book, a quote or two that you'd like to share with them before we head out today.
Recent books that I give away a lot of, uh, a couple by Michael Easter, who lives not far from you, The Comfort Crisis and Scarcity Brain. And then, Infectious Generosity by Chris Anderson, the TED Talks guy. And, you actually said these words, things that matter, making more time and energy and money in our lives for the things that really matter, because it's not the stuff that, is screaming at us from Amazon, that we should buy. Um, Things That Matter by Joshua Becker. Um, those are all, I think, great books that, like I said, I give away a lot. And one of the things we were out shooting a video here with a local videographer on our new tent, The Whisper. This was a while back, and she was kind of at a inflection point in a relationship and was asking me. She knew I'd been married 42 years, and so we're kind of packing up afterwards. And she's asking me like, how how do you make a relationship work? What are the crucial things? And I came up with, for me, work hard, be nice, stay curious. And I know for Francie and I, we have those three in common. And that's the basis that we built a 42-year marriage on. having death of a child, a disabled child, almost getting killed in a plane crash, financial issues, bankruptcy, things like that. So
That's a lot. That's a lot of insight, a lot of lessons, and by the way, again, I love the word curiosity. It's I got curious about it because I was watching Ted Lasso for 3 seasons, and it's such a powerful word because we should be curious. So I love you sharing that. Speaking of the books, I mean, we had shared before we hit the record button that you were would offering to gift a couple books for our listeners, and I would love to take you up on that offer if you're still open to it.
sure, yeah, no, I'll send three signed books or one signed book to whichever three people you tell me to.
Okay.
Um,
Very good. Well, we'll put that call to action up on our show notes, and so our listeners can take advantage of that either via our website or via a comment and a like, and also a comment and a like on Amazon and Spotify. And so the first three that respond, they get a book. I love that. Thank you for that gift. Now, before we do head out, if our listeners would like to learn more about you and your work, where are the best places to go?
Best place probably my website, glenvanpeski.com. I've got tips and tricks. You've got the blogs that you read. You can sign up for my fortnightly newsletter, which is very brief. I'm glad you appreciate that because I'm not a writing doesn't bring me as much joy as hiking. So things tend to be short. Yeah. And there's videos there and all sorts of resources.
Very good. And we'll provide the backlinks to the website and to our show notes as well. Glenn, it has been a pleasure to get to know you and chat with you. Uh, I feel like we could at least enjoy a morning sunrise or an afternoon sunset together with a beautiful, dark, strong beverage. And I hope that we get to do that someday. But again, it's been a pleasure to have you on the Outdoor Adventure Series podcast. And thank you for your time and congratulations again on the book. And we wish you much success with it. So thank you.
Thanks, Howard. It's been a pleasure to chat with you. And I look forward to having coffee with you next time we're coming through Las Vegas in Wally.
Sounds like a plan. Listen, stay in the line. We're going to do a very quick close, and then you and I can have a final chat. Okay.
Okay.
All right, folks. We have just been chatting with Glen Van Peski, uh, just an accomplished engineer, land surveyor, again, founder of Gossamer Gear. You've got to check out the website. Some great gear. I'm actually, I love this idea of not carrying around a 5 pound blow up air mattress anymore. But there's some great products out there. But really, why we're here today is you got to check out his book, Take Less, Do More: Surprising Lessons in Generosity, Gratitude, and Curiosity from an ultralight backpacker. Now, we're going to provide backlinks to Glen's website at glenvanpeski.com. We'll also have links back to his social sites of Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and I think even X is out there as well. And I think also the Vimeo links too. So a lot of ways to get to know more about Glen and his work and his wonderful book. As for us, you can find this episode on our website, outdooradventureseries.com. We also have our LinkedIn and Facebook pages. This video of this episode will be up on YouTube. And of course, you can find us wherever you listen to your podcast. So maybe you're not listening to us walking down the Pacific Crest Trail, the John Muir Trail, the Appalachian Trail, but when you finish and you're driving to or from destinations, do check us out on your favorite podcast directory. Okay, folks, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, go out there, have a phenomenal day. Have a very happy new year as well. Take care of yourselves and your family. And we look forward to having you join us on a future episode of the Outdoor Adventure Series podcast.